The battle had been a tedious affair, a routine extermination of a rebel cell near the outer rim. For Darth Vader it was less a battle, and more a form of pest control. His TIE advanced X-1, a black predator in a sea of stars, carved through the fleeing blockade runners with contemptuous ease. The final jump to lightspeed was meant to be a simple return to his flagship. It was not. A proximity alarm, a high piercing shriek was his only warning. One of the rebel cruisers, its hull breached and its reactor critical, made a final suicidal jump into hyperspace at the exact coordinates of Vader's own vector. The two fields of warped spacetime collided. The universe tore. Inside the cockpit, Vader was thrown not against his restraints, but against reality itself. The hypnotic blue tunnel of hyperspace shattered into a nauseating kaleidoscopic storm. He was no longer traveling through space, but through a chaotic, non-linear dimension where time and distance were meaningless, bleeding into one another. The very fabric of physics was unraveling, and his ship was at the heart of the rupture. His passage, a violent intrusion of a will and technology from another reality, did not go unnoticed. Deep in the folded space of another universe, the Spacing Guild navigators convulsed in their tanks of spice gas. They, who saw all paths, all safe routes through the cosmos, suddenly felt a new path being forged, not with calculation and prescience, but with a brutal, tearing force. It was a jagged scar across the smooth, golden tapestry of space-time, a psychic scream of a power that navigated the void without their blessing, without their spice. It was a blasphemy of pure, raw will. For Vader, the journey ended as violently as it began. His ship was spat out of the rupture, its hyperdrive a molten ruin, its hull screaming as it entered the atmosphere of a great, ochre-colored world. Alarms blared, but he had already sealed his suit, his mechanical breathing a steady, familiar rhythm against the ship's death throes. Through the cracked viewport, he saw nothing but an endless, churning ocean of sand, baked under the light of a single brilliant, white-hot sun. He did not fight the crash. He reached out with the Force, cocooning the cockpit in a protective shell of telekinetic energy as it tore away from the rest of the disintegrating fighter. He hit the sand with the force of a meteor, carving a long, black, smoking furrow in a dune sea the size of a continent. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the hiss of cooling metal and the low, mournful sigh of the wind across the sand. Then, with a pneumatic hiss, the canopy was blasted away. Twisted metal groaned as it was bent outwards. From the ruin, a figure rose, a tall, black-armored giant, his form a stark geometric intrusion of hard lines and dark purpose in a world of soft, flowing sand. Darth Vader stood in the deep desert of Arrakis. He reached out with the Force, a desperate, galaxy-spanning search for a familiar presence, the comforting, oppressive weight of his master, the hum of the Imperial network, the distant cries of the war he had been fighting his entire life. There was nothing. The Force was here, but it was muted, strange, as if filtered through a thick, heavy blanket, and beneath that blanket something else stirred. A deep, thrumming, ancient consciousness in the sand itself, a power that smelled of cinnamon and infinity. His ship was gone. His galaxy was gone. He was alone, a king without an empire, a shadow without a sun to cast it. But he was alive. And where there was life, there was the opportunity for order. His own order. Survival was the immediate priority. The sun of Arrakis was a merciless, white-hot eye, its heat beating down on his black armor. His suit's internal cooling systems, designed for the thermal extremes of space, whirred to life, but he knew they were a finite resource. He needed shelter. He needed information. His sensors picked up the faint, telltale energy signature of a sublight craft approaching. It was a Harkonnen patrol thopter, its dragonfly wings beating the thin air as it swept the deep desert for signs of Fremen. The spotters saw the black scar on the sand, a fresh wound in a landscape that should have been pristine. Cursing the smugglers or spice poachers they assumed were responsible, the thopter descended, landing 100 meters from the strange black wreckage. 5 men emerged, their bodies encased in crude, bulky stillsuits. They carried lasguns, their expressions a mixture of boredom and petty cruelty. They were the dregs of the Harkonnen military machine, soldiers who saw this desert world as nothing more than a place to exert their own minor tyrannies. Vader watched them from the shadow of his ruined ship, a silent black statue. He listened to their thoughts with the Force, their minds open, shallow pools of simple, brutish desires. He learned their names, their allegiance to a house Harkonnen, their fear of the desert dwellers they called Fremen, and their greed for the ubiquitous, all-important substance they called spice. The patrol leader, a fleshy man with a cruel sneer, saw Vader's unmoving form. "Look at that," he sneered to his men. "Some kind of desert golem, or a new kind of stillsuit. Fancy. Let's see what's inside." He raised his lasgun, a weapon that fired a beam of concentrated high-energy light. He fired. The crimson beam, a lance of pure energy, shot across the sand. Vader did not move. He simply ignited his lightsaber. The iconic snap hiss cut through the desert silence, and the crimson blade sprang to life. He held it casually before him, and the incoming lasgun beam was simply absorbed, its energy dissipating harmlessly against the plasma blade. A stunned silence fell over the 5 Harkonnen soldiers. They had never seen anything like it. A personal shield. Only the great houses had those, and even they were useless against lasguns. "Kill it," the leader roared, his confusion turning to anger. The 5 men opened fire, their lasgun beams converging on Vader. He simply stood his ground, his lightsaber a blur of motion as he effortlessly deflected and absorbed their attack. It was the work of a moment, a casual, contemptuous display of a power so far beyond their comprehension that it might as well have been magic. When their weapons clicked empty, their power packs drained, they were left standing in the searing heat, staring at the black giant who was utterly unharmed. "My turn," Vader's amplified voice boomed, the sound a mechanical, terrifying growl in the desert silence. He moved. He was a blur of black, covering the 100 meters between them in a few, impossibly long strides. The soldiers, paralyzed by fear, had no time to react. He did not use his lightsaber. That would have been too merciful. He used the Force. He raised a hand, and the patrol leader was lifted from his feet, his throat constricting, his lasgun clattering to the sand. "Tell me of your Baron," Vader commanded, his mind a cold, sharp probe that tore into the man's consciousness. The soldier's mind was an open book. Vader saw the bloated, monstrous form of Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. He saw the filthy, industrial cities of Giedi Prime. He saw the Baron's plans for this world, Arrakis, his hatred for a rival House Atreides, and his secret alliance with the ruler of this galaxy, the Padishah Emperor. Vader learned of the feudal structure of the Imperium, the Spacing Guild's monopoly on travel, the Bene Gesserit witches, and the all-consuming, galaxy-spanning importance of the spice melange. It was a complex, intricate web of power, treachery, and ambition. It was a game he knew how to play. "You have been useful," Vader concluded. With a clench of his fist, he snapped the soldier's neck and tossed the body aside. The other 4 soldiers, their minds now broken by sheer terror, turned and fled. Vader let them run for a few paces, a cruel cat-and-mouse game. Then he raised his other hand and clenched it into a fist. The 4 running men collapsed simultaneously, their bodies imploding as their internal organs were ruptured by an invisible, irresistible pressure. Vader stood alone in the desert, surrounded by the 5 twisted bodies. The encounter had been brief, brutal, and profoundly informative. He now had the basic framework of this new galaxy's power structure, and he had a name for its most precious resource: spice, the key to power, the key to everything. The arrival of a being like Darth Vader in the delicate, prescient-driven ecosystem of the Dune universe was not a subtle event. It was a psychic earthquake, and its aftershocks were felt in every corner of the galaxy where power and foresight were currency. On the ocean world of Caladan, Paul Atreides, the young heir of House Atreides, awoke from a spice-induced dream with a strangled cry. He had been walking the golden path, his nascent prescient abilities showing him 1,000 possible futures, a swirling, confusing sea of choices and consequences. He had seen the move to Arrakis, the treachery of the Harkonnens, the faces of the Fremen, the coming of his jihad. But now, a new, terrible feature had appeared in his visions. It was a hole, a void, a patch of absolute, impenetrable darkness in the landscape of the future. It was not a lack of vision. It was a vision of a lack. It was a future that could not be seen, a path that was not a possibility, but a dead, unchangeable, and terrifying certainty. It had a shape, the shape of a tall, black-armored man, and it had a sound, the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of a respirator. Paul sat up in his bed, his body covered in a cold sweat. He knew, with a certainty that went beyond simple dreams, that a new terrible player had just stepped onto the board. A player who did not walk the paths of fate, but who carved his own straight black line through them. On the Bene Gesserit mother world of Wallach Nithan, the ancient and powerful Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam was in a deep trance, her consciousness adrift in the collective other memory of her order. Suddenly she was thrown from her trance with a violent, psychic jolt. She and the sisterhood had felt the scar on space-time, the blasphemous passage of an unspiced traveler through the void. But now, they felt the source. It was a mind, a male mind, and it was a mind of impossible, terrifying power. For 10,000 years, the Bene Gesserit had been meticulously, secretly, guiding the bloodlines of the great houses. Their Kwisatz Haderach breeding program was the ultimate goal, a male Bene Gesserit, a being who could be in many places at once, who could see the future, a psychic super being whom they could control. And now, their worst nightmare had been realized. A male with psychic abilities that rivaled or perhaps even surpassed their own had appeared as if from nowhere. He was not of their breeding. He was not of their control. He was a wild card, a genetic and psychic anomaly of the highest order, a walking, breathing symbol of their breeding program's potential for catastrophic failure. He was a Kwisatz Haderach, born of chaos, and he threatened to burn their entire carefully constructed house of cards to the ground. And on the dark industrial hellhole of Gedi Prime, the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen floated in his private chambers, his immense bulk supported by suspensors. He listened to the report from his nephew, Rabban, his face a mask of oily, intelligent curiosity. A single man, Uncle, Rabban said, his voice a mixture of awe and fear. He killed the entire patrol. Their Thopter's black box recorded it. He had a sword of red light. The Baron's fat lips curled into a slow, predatory smile. He was not afraid. He was intrigued. He did not see a demon or a witch. He saw a tool, a weapon, a new beautiful and exquisitely brutal piece to be used in his endless game against the Atreides and the Emperor. A man with a sword of light and a mind that can kill, the Baron mused, his small black eyes glinting. How very theatrical. He is a monster, Rabban, a beautiful, perfect monster. And monsters can be tamed, they can be caged, they can be pointed. He fatally underestimated the nature of the being who had just arrived. He saw a powerful piece on the game board. He failed to comprehend that what had actually arrived was a new player, one who was about to flip the entire board over and set it on fire. The ripples of Vader's arrival were spreading, and every power in the galaxy was beginning to react, each according to its own nature, the prophet with fear, the witches with alarm, and the monster with greed. The news of the lost Harkonnen patrol reached Duke Leto Atreides not as a formal report, but as a ghost on the wind. A garbled, static-filled transmission from a deep desert listening post, logged and flagged by his communications officers as an anomaly. It spoke of strange energy signatures, of lasgun fire where there should be none, and then a profound and sudden silence. Duke Leto, standing on the balcony of the cavernous, sand-blasted residency in Arrakeen, felt a familiar cold knot in his stomach. He was a man walking into a trap, and he knew it. Arrakis was a gift from the Emperor, but it was a poisoned gift. He was surrounded by Harkonnen agents, by the unknown loyalties of the Fremen, and by the crushing weight of the spice quota. He did not need another mystery. But Leto was a pragmatist, a ruler who understood that knowledge was power, and that any unexplained event in his new domain was a potential threat. "Duncan," he said, turning to the loyal swordmaster of the Jinnahs, who stood at his side. "My Lord Duke," Duncan Idaho replied, his keen, intelligent eyes already focused on the distant desert. "Take a Thopter," Leto commanded. "Find the source of that transmission. Be cautious. I do not like the smell of this. It feels like a new thread in the Baron's web." Duncan did not hesitate. He was a man of action, the Duke's eyes and ears, and when necessary, his sword. He took a single, light ornithopter and flew into the vast, unforgiving expanse of the deep desert, following the coordinates from the garbled transmission. He found the site of the slaughter. The 5 Harkonnen bodies were already being scoured by the sand and the wind, their still suits torn, their bodies twisted into unnatural shapes. He saw the black angular wreckage of a craft unlike any he had ever seen, no curves, no sign of a Holtzman engine, just sharp, brutal lines of an unknown scorched metal. Duncan was a master of tracking, a skill honed in 100 different wildernesses. He found the tracks. A single set of heavy booted footprints leading away from the carnage. The stride was long, the impressions deep, indicating a being of great size and weight. He followed the trail for hours, his Thopter flying low, until he saw him, a tall black figure, walking through the desert with a steady, relentless, and utterly mad purpose. No still suit, no supplies, just a giant in black armor, walking into the heart of the furnace. Duncan landed his thopter a respectful distance away and approached on foot, his twin blades held in a non-threatening but ready position. Vader had felt the thopter's approach for the last hour. He had felt the mind of its pilot, a mind that was sharp, disciplined, and loyal, a stark contrast to the brutish, slovenly minds of the Harkonnen soldiers. This was a warrior. He stopped and turned, his mechanical breathing the only sound in the vast silence. Duncan stopped 50 paces away. The figure was even more intimidating up close. It was a monolith of pure black menace, and the power that radiated from it was a palpable physical pressure. "I am Duncan Idaho, Swordmaster of House Atreides," he called out, his voice steady. "This land is now under the protection of Duke Leto. By his authority, I ask your name and your purpose here." Vader regarded the man. He felt no deception, only a warrior's professional caution. He had learned from the Harkonnen minds that House Atreides were the enemies of his enemies. That created a potential temporary alignment of interests. "I have no name you would understand." Vader's voice boomed, the sound both familiar and alien to Duncan, like a voice speaking from the depths of a cave. "My purpose is my own. I have no quarrel with your House Atreides." "You had a quarrel with House Harkonnen," Duncan countered, gesturing back towards the site of the slaughter. "They were an obstacle," Vader stated simply. "I removed them." Duncan's mind raced. The sheer casual power in that statement was chilling. He had seen the 5 bodies. This being spoke of it as if he had been swatting flies. "My Duke Leto Atreides would speak with you," Duncan said, making a calculated gamble. "He is a just man. He sees the Harkonnens and the Emperor for what they are. He believes you could be a powerful friend." Vader considered this. He was alone. His resources were non-existent. An alliance, even a temporary one with these primitives, could provide him with shelter, resources, and most importantly, more information. He could learn the weaknesses of his new enemies from the inside. "I will meet with your Duke," Vader conceded. The flight back to Arrakeen was a tense, silent affair. Duncan flew the thopter, his eyes constantly stealing glances at the towering, silent figure seated behind him. Vader, for his part, used the time to gently probe the Swordmaster's mind, gleaning more details about the Atreides, their code of honor, their precarious political situation, their deep love for their son Paul. When they arrived at the residency, Duncan presented the anomaly to his Duke. Leto Atreides, a man of noble bearing and immense personal courage, stood his ground as the 8-foot giant in black armor strode into his great hall. He saw the reports of his advisors, the fear in the eyes of his men, but he also saw what Duncan had seen, a power of an entirely different magnitude. He was playing the most dangerous game of his life. He was surrounded by enemies, and a new piece, a black, terrifying, and utterly unpredictable piece, had just fallen onto the board. He made the decision that would seal the fate of his house, and perhaps the galaxy. He would not treat this being as an enemy. He would treat it as a potential god of war. It was a gamble that would have catastrophic and legendary consequences. The great hall of the Arrakeen residency, a cavernous space of carved stone and plasteel, had seen its share of tense negotiations. But the silence that fell as Darth Vader strode into the center of the room was of a different quality entirely. It was a heavy, oppressive silence, thick with the unasked question of what, precisely, they were dealing with. Duke Leto stood his ground before his ducal throne, flanked by his most trusted advisors, Thufir Hawat, the Mentat assassin, Gurney Halleck, the War Master, and his bound concubine, the Lady Jessica. Their faces were masks of professional calm, but inside their minds were racing. Thufir Hawat's Mentat consciousness was in overdrive, cycling through 1,000 different probabilities and calculations. The being before him was a living contradiction. Its armor was of an unknown, impossibly advanced alloy. Its energy signature was off the charts, yet it had walked from the deep desert. There was no data, no precedent. It was a problem that logic alone could not solve, and for a Mentat, there was no greater terror. Gurney Halleck, ever the warrior, saw only the combat pragmatics. He saw the being's size, the deliberate, powerful economy of its movements. He saw the strange cylindrical weapon at its belt. His hand rested on the hilt of his own sword, his mind already running through a dozen different attack vectors, and dismissing them all as suicidal. But it was the Lady Jessica who felt the true nature of the being before them. As a Bene Gesserit, her senses were attuned to the subtle currents of human emotion, to the infinitesimal tells of muscle and nerve that betrayed a person's deepest truths. When she looked at the black armored form, she saw none of that. She saw a void, but she could feel what was behind the void. It was a maelstrom, a hurricane of banked, controlled, and unimaginably powerful emotions. Pain, so profound it was a physical presence in the room. Grief, so ancient it felt like a geological feature. And rage, a rage that was not hot and explosive but cold, dense and absolute, like the heart of a dying star. It was a rage that had been forged into a perfect, unshakable will. She knew she had to test it. She had to know if this will could be bent. "We welcome you to Arrakis, stranger," Duke Leto said, his voice a calm, regal baritone. "I am Duke Leto Atreides. We mean you no harm. We ask only to understand who you are and what your purpose is on our world." Vader's helmeted head turned slowly, his golden visor fixing on the Duke, then on the woman who stood beside him, her posture radiating a strange, disciplined energy. He could feel her. A nascent, untrained, but potent psychic. Jessica met his unseen gaze. She took a half-step forward, her posture subtly shifting, her vocal cords tightening. She focused her prana bindu control, the total mastery of her own body and nerves, and she used the voice. It was not a shout. It was a quiet, precise, and utterly commanding word, pitched at a specific frequency designed to bypass conscious thought and implant a command directly into the listener's primitive brainstem. "Tell us who you are." The command was perfect. It had brought proud warriors to their knees and made liars confess their deepest secrets. It should have been irresistible. It had no effect. Vader did not even flinch. His mind, a fortress forged in the crucible of the dark side, did not even register the voice as a threat. It was a child's whisper against the roar of a hurricane. He had endured the full psychic might of his emperor. He had battled the minds of Jedi masters. This woman's parlor trick was nothing. He responded, not with words but with a flicker of his own power. He did not attack her mind. He did not seek to harm it. He simply pushed. He revealed a microscopic fraction of his own will, a single cold, hard point of his presence, and focused it on her. Lady Jessica gasped, stumbling back as if she had been physically struck. Her prana bindu control shattered. Her heart hammered in her chest. For a terrifying instant, she had felt the full, crushing weight of his soul. She had felt the abyss. It was not just a man. It was a force, a walking, breathing nexus of pure, disciplined, and absolute power. Her most profound and subtle weapon had been met with a psychic sledgehammer. A low, mechanical chuckle emanated from Vader's respirator. The sound was more terrifying than any roar. "Your powers are weak, old woman." His amplified voice boomed, the words from a common Star Wars insult, but given a new, chilling weight in this context. He turned his attention back to the Duke, dismissing Jessica as an irrelevance. "I am Lord Vader," he declared. "My purpose is to bring order to this chaotic galaxy. Your house, and the house of your enemy, are merely obstacles in my path. Whether you are an obstacle that is useful, or one that must be removed, is a choice you will make." The threat was naked, absolute, and utterly credible. Duke Leto Atreides, the Red Duke, a man who had faced down assassins and navigated the deadly politics of the Landsraad, had just been confronted with a power that operated on an entirely different level. He was no longer playing a game of feints and hidden daggers. He was standing in the shadow of a walking apocalypse. The news of the anomaly on Arrakis reached the Imperial Palace on Kai-Tine with a speed that spoke of its immense gravity. The Spacing Guild, their navigators still reeling from the psychic scar of Vader's arrival, reported the existence of a rogue traveler, the Baron Harkonnen. In a secret message, spoke of a black-armored witch of impossible power now in the employ of the Atreides. Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV, a man whose throne was built on a foundation of paranoia and carefully maintained balances of power, was deeply disturbed. An unknown superpowered being, allied with the popular and charismatic Duke Leto, was a threat of the highest order. He did what he always did when faced with a matter of deep political or genetic significance. He consulted the Bene Gesserit. The Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam arrived on Arrakis aboard a guild highliner, her presence a cold, dark shadow in the corridors of the residency. She was an old woman, her face a mask of wrinkles and ancient calculating intelligence. She was the Emperor's truthsayer, a master of reading the subtlest signs of deception, and she had come to test the beast. She confronted Vader in the same great hall where he had dismissed Jessica. She was not afraid. She was a Bene Gesserit. Fear was the mind killer. So she began, her voice a dry, rasping whisper. You are the one, the male witch who has upset the balance of the universe. Vader stood before her, a silent black tower. He felt her power, a disciplined, ancient, and deeply insidious psychic presence. She was far stronger than the Lady Jessica. The sisterhood has spent 10,000 years guiding the human race, she continued, her dark, bird-like eyes seeming to pierce his helmet. We have bred for prescience, for control, for the coming of the one who can be in all places. You are an abomination, a cancer on our great design. But before I pass my judgment, I must know one thing. Are you even human? She produced a small, green, poisoned needle, its tip coated with a meta-cyanide that could kill in seconds. The gum Jabbar. This is a test for humanity, she explained, her voice cold. An animal, caught in a trap, will gnaw off its own leg to escape. A human will endure the pain, subverting their instincts to a higher goal. You will place your hand in this box. It contains pain. If you withdraw your hand, my gum Jabbar will find your neck. Vader looked from the needle to the plain, simple box she held. He could feel the nerve induction field within it, a primitive but effective torture device. He had endured far, far worse. A low mechanical chuckle once again came from his respirator. You test me with pain, he boomed, the sound a mixture of contempt and amusement. Woman, I have lived in a box of pain my entire life. Your toy is nothing. Then you will not fear it, she insisted, her gaze unwavering. Vader, indulging her, held out his right, gauntleted hand. The box will not fit, he stated. Your other hand, she commanded. He slowly, deliberately, held out his left hand. The one that was still flesh and blood, hidden beneath the black glove. He placed it inside the box. I hold at your neck the gum Jabbar, she whispered. She activated the device. Vader felt a sensation like his hand was being plunged into a vat of acid, then set on fire, then flash frozen, all at once. The nerve induction field was agonizing, a white-hot scream of pure neurological agony that would have made any normal man faint. He did not flinch. He did not even grunt. His mechanical breathing did not change its rhythm. He simply stood there, his mind a fortress of cold, disciplined rage. He took the pain, acknowledged it, and then walled it off, a minor, irrelevant sensation in a life defined by suffering. The Reverend Mother watched him with her keen, analytical eyes. She saw no flicker of his eyelids behind the helmet, no tensing of a muscle, no change in his breathing. She had tested nobles, warriors, and even her own students. She had never seen such control. Enough, she said, deactivating the box. You have proven you are human. Vader slowly withdrew his hand. The skin was red and blistered, but he did not seem to notice. Now, his voice was a low, dangerous growl. It is my turn to test you. Before she could react, he reached out with the force. The small pain box flew from her hand and into his. The gum Jabbar needle was wrenched from her other hand and sent clattering to the far side of the room. He held the box before her, and with a gesture of his will, he activated it, its opening now facing her. You speak of enduring pain for a higher purpose, he said. Let us see if you can practice what you preach. The Reverend Mother gasped as an invisible, agonizing force, 100 times more powerful than the box's own field, enveloped her hand. It was a force grip, focused not to crush, but to simulate the exact agony of the device. She cried out, her ancient face contorting in pain, sweat beading on her brow. She tried to use her prana bindu training to wall off the pain, but it was useless. This was not a physical sensation. It was a direct psychic assault. The test is simple, witch, Vader snarled. Admit that your power is a child's game compared to mine, and I will let you live. She endured for a moment longer, her pride warring with her agony. But the pain was too great. Her will broke. Enough, she gasped, falling to her knees. I yield. Vader released the pressure. The Reverend Mother knelt before him, panting, her hand trembling, her composure utterly shattered. He had not just passed her test. He had turned it back on her, proven his absolute superiority, and broken the will of one of the most powerful women in the galaxy. He was not a being to be tested. He was the one who would now sit in judgment. The Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam's return to Kaitan was a thing of grim, terrified urgency. She did not request an audience with the Padesha Emperor. She demanded it. She bypassed all protocol, her face a mask of cold fury and fear that none dared to challenge. She stood before the golden lion throne of Shaddam IV, her body still trembling from the memory of Vader's psychic assault. "My Lord Emperor," she began, her voice a low, urgent hiss. "The anomaly on Arrakis is not a witch, it is not a rogue agent, it is a dark lord of a power I have never before encountered. It passed the Gom Jabbar without flinching, and then turned its own power on me. It is a male who has mastered the ways of the mind without our guidance. A wild Kwisatz Haderach. He is a threat to the sisterhood, a threat to the guild, and a direct existential threat to your throne. Shaddam IV, a man whose reign was defined by his fear of any power that could rival his own, felt a cold knot of dread in his stomach. He had allowed the Atreides to go to Arrakis, surrounded by his Harkonnen puppets, to be destroyed. He had not accounted for a superpowered being of unknown origin entering the equation on the side of his enemy. "He is allied with the Atreides?" the Emperor demanded, his voice thin and reedy. "For now," the Reverend Mother confirmed, "but his ambition is his own. He speaks of bringing order to the galaxy. He sees you, my lord, as nothing more than another provincial king to be swept aside. His arrogance is absolute, and his power may be great enough to justify it." The Emperor's fear quickly turned to a cold, imperial rage. No one threatened the Golden Lion throne. No one. This anomaly, this Lord Vader, was a cancer, and the only way to deal with a cancer was to cut it out, violently. He summoned the commander of his personal guard, the Burseg of the Imperial Sardaukar. The man was a broad, brutal-looking warrior, his face a mass of scars, his loyalty to the throne absolute. "You have heard the truth-sayer's report," the Emperor said, his voice cold and sharp. "There is a black-armored witch on Arrakis, in the service of House Atreides. He is a warrior of some unusual skill." "All men die, my Lord Emperor," the Burseg replied, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Indeed," the Emperor said with a thin, cruel smile, "I am dispatching you, and a full company of my finest Sardaukar, to Arrakis. Your mission is simple. You will find this witch, you will surround him, and you will kill him. I want his head, and I want the head of every Atreides soldier you find. Leave no one alive. Let the sands of Arrakis drink their fill of traitors' blood." The Burseg slammed his fist against his chest in a sharp salute. "It will be done, my lord. We are the Emperor's fury." And so it was set in motion. A guild highliner was chartered for a secret, high-priority transport. Aboard it traveled 100 of the most feared soldiers in the known universe. The Imperial Sardaukar. They were not just men. They were the product of the prison planet of Salusa Secundus, a hellhole where only 1 in 10 even survived to adulthood. They were warriors whose every waking moment was a struggle for survival against a hostile environment and each other. Their training was the most brutal imaginable, their fanaticism absolute. A single Sardaukar was considered the equal of 10 soldiers of any great house. They were the Emperor's finest, the terror of the Landsrod, the blunt instrument that had kept Shaddam IV on the throne for decades. They had never known defeat. They had never faced an enemy they could not overwhelm with sheer, fanatical, brutal violence. They traveled to Arrakis, their minds filled with a simple, absolute purpose. They were going to kill a witch. They were utterly, completely, and fatally unprepared for what they were about to face. They were lambs marching proudly and fanatically to the slaughter. The attack came at night, under the faint, cold light of Arrakis's second moon. The Sardaukar were masters of the ambush, of shock and terror. They descended upon the Atreides residency in Arrakeen, not with a frontal assault, but like ghosts, their movements silent, their dark armor blending with the shadows of the great stone city. They had one target, the black-armored anomaly, Lord Vader. Vader was in the high gardens of the residency, a sterile, enclosed space that tried to replicate the lush greenery of Caladan. He was in a state of meditation, his consciousness extended, feeling the strange, thrumming life of the great worms in the desert, tasting the cinnamon scent of the spice on the night air. He felt the Sardaukar, long before they arrived. He felt their minds, 100 points of cold, hard, fanatical hate. They were different from the Harkonnen thugs. Their minds were disciplined, shielded by a faith as absolute and as arrogant as his own. They were true warriors. He felt a flicker of professional respect. He did not wait for their ambush. He rose, a silent black shadow, and went to meet them. The Sardaukar had surrounded the gardens, their positions perfect, their killbox inescapable. Their commander, a hulking Levin Breet, gave the silent hand signal. They attacked. From all sides they swarmed into the gardens, their serrated blades held high, their war cries a guttural, terrifying chant in their ancient tongue. They were a wave of death, designed to overwhelm any single target. They found Vader standing calmly in the center of the garden's main plaza, his lightsaber unlit. The first Sardaukar reached him, his blade swinging for Vader's neck. Vader simply raised a hand. The Sardaukar stopped in mid-stride, his body frozen by a force grip. Vader tilted his head, and with a sickening crunch, the soldier's neck snapped. The others did not falter. They were Sardaukar. They did not feel fear. They surged over their fallen comrade. The lightsaber ignited. The garden, which had been a place of quiet contemplation, became a charnel house. Vader was a whirlwind of crimson light and black armor. He was no longer a general or a lord. He was a weapon, a singularity of combat that the Sardaukar were utterly unprepared for. Their blades, which could cut through plasteel, scraped uselessly against his strange black armor. Their fanatical courage was meaningless against a being who could move faster than their eyes could track. Their disciplined formations were broken by waves of telekinetic force that threw them into walls and against each other. But as he fought, he was also learning. With every Sardaukar he cut down, he plunged his mind into theirs in the moment of their death. He tore their knowledge from their dying consciousness. He saw the hellish landscape of Salusa Secundus, the brutal training that had forged them. He felt their absolute, unquestioning devotion to their Padishah Emperor, a man they revered as a god, and he saw the Emperor's plan. He saw the secret alliance with the Harkonnens. He saw the coming, full-scale assault on House Atreides. He saw the treachery that was about to unfold. He killed a commander, and from his mind he plucked the final, critical piece of information. The true source of the Sardaukar's strength, the true prize of this universe, was not just the spice but the planet itself. The one who controlled Arrakis controlled the flow of spice. The one who controlled the spice controlled the universe. The battle lasted less than 5 minutes. When it was over, Darth Vader stood alone in the ruined garden, surrounded by the bodies of 100 of the Emperor's finest soldiers. Their blood, dark in the moonlight, watered the roots of the exotic plants. He deactivated his lightsaber. The purge was complete. He now had the information he needed. He knew the Emperor's plan. He knew the Harkonnens' role. And he knew that the fall of House Atreides was imminent. He could have warned them. He could have saved them. But they were not his allies. They were pieces on a board, and they were about to be swept aside. Their fall was not a tragedy. It was an opportunity. In the chaos of their destruction, he would find his own path to power. The attack on Arrakeen began with a betrayal. Dr. Yue, the Atreides' trusted suck doctor, his imperial conditioning broken by the Harkonnens' cruel manipulation, lowered the shields of the Residency. The great invisible Holtzman shield that had protected the city flickered and died. And the storm broke. Harkonnen frigates, which had been hidden in the shadow of Arrakis's moon, descended from the sky like bloated black birds of prey. Their missile batteries opened up, and the city of Arrakeen was engulfed in fire and thunder. Simultaneously, thousands upon thousands of Harkonnen soldiers, supplemented by the Emperor's Sardaukar in Harkonnen colors, poured into the streets. The Atreides soldiers, the most loyal and disciplined army of any great house, were caught completely by surprise. They fought with a desperate, noble courage, but they were overwhelmed. The battle for Arrakeen was a slaughter. Darth Vader was in his chambers when the explosions began. He had known the attack was coming, but its scale, its sheer overwhelming force was impressive even to him. He was not loyal to the Atreides. Their fate was of no concern to him. His only objective was his own survival, and the exploitation of the chaos that was to follow. He strode from his chambers into the corridors of the burning Residency. Atreides guardsmen, their faces grim, were forming a last, hopeless defensive line. Harkonnen soldiers were pouring through a breach in the wall. Vader was caught in the middle. A group of Atreides soldiers, seeing his towering black form, assumed he was a new, terrible weapon of the enemy. "For the Duke," they cried, and charged him. On the other side of the corridor, a Harkonnen captain, seeing the same terrifying figure, roared, "Kill the Atreides witch," and led his own men in a charge. Vader found himself the focal point of two opposing and equally foolish assaults. He ignited his lightsaber. He did not choose a side. He chose his own. He became an indiscriminate, terrifying agent of pure chaos in the heart of the battle. He cut down Atreides soldiers who got in his way. He carved a path through the Harkonnen invaders. He was a one-man army, a force of nature that belonged to no one, fighting for no cause but his own. He moved through the burning city, a black phantom in a world of orange fire and black smoke. He was not trying to save the city. He was not trying to win the battle. He was moving towards the spaceport. He needed a ship. He needed to escape this collapsing pocket of order. He saw the fall of the Duke. He felt the life of Leto Atreides, a man he had respected for his courage, be extinguished. He felt the capture of the Lady Jessica and her son Paul. He noted it, filed it away. They were assets, perhaps for a future day. But for now, they were on their own. He reached the Arrakeen spaceport to find it a maelstrom of fire and death. Harkonnen troops were executing captured Atreides soldiers. The hulking, brutish form of Beast Rabban was directing the slaughter, his voice a roaring bellow of sadistic glee. Vader strode onto the landing field. A company of Harkonnen soldiers turned to face him, their rifles raised. "It's the Black Golem," their commander yelled. "The Baron wants him alive." They fired stun nets and sedative gas grenades. Vader simply walked through the gas, his respirator filtering it out. He cut the nets from the air with his lightsaber. He was not there to fight. He was there to acquire transportation. He saw a single, sleek ornithopter, its dragonfly wings still intact. He raised a hand, and a wave of pure force energy erupted from him. The entire company of Harkonnen soldiers was thrown back, a wave of bodies and armor crashing against the side of a burning transport. He strode to the ornithopter, climbed into the cockpit, and began to analyze its strange, primitive controls. It took him less than a minute. The engines whined to life. As he was about to take off, Rabban himself, his face a mask of rage, charged the small craft, a massive ink-vine whip in his hand. Vader did not even look at him. He simply pressed a button. The ornithopter's boarding ramp, a heavy slab of reinforced metal, slammed down, catching Rabban in the chest and sending him flying backwards into a pile of smoldering cargo containers. His armor cracked, his ribs broken. The ornithopter lifted into the air, its wings beating a steady, powerful rhythm. Below him, the city of Arrakeen was a funeral pyre, a monument to the fall of a great house. Vader had not saved them. He had not helped their enemies. He had simply walked through the fire, untouched, his own purpose now crystal clear. The powers of this galaxy, the Harkonnens, the Emperor, were powerful, but they were predictable. They played a game of treachery and armies. He would play a different game. The true power of this world was not in its cities or its armies. It was in the desert. It was in the spice, and it was in the strange, fanatical people who called the desert their home. He turned the ornithopter south, towards the deep desert, leaving the ruins of Arrakeen behind. The fall of the Atreides was not an ending. It was the beginning of his own true war. The flight south was a journey into a new kind of emptiness. The fires of Arrakeen faded behind him, replaced by an endless, undulating sea of sand that stretched to the horizon in every direction. The sun, a brilliant, merciless orb, beat down on the ornithopter's canopy, the heat a physical, oppressive weight. Vader flew for a day, then another, pushing the small craft to its limits. He was searching for the Fremen, the desert dwellers he had learned of from the minds of his enemies. He knew they were the key. They were the ones who had mastered this harsh, unforgiving world. They held the secrets of the spice and of survival. He found a place to land in a deep, rocky sietch, a natural basin that offered some protection from the wind. His ornithopter's fuel was spent. He was now a pedestrian in the largest, deadliest desert in the universe. He stepped out of the craft into the full, brutal embrace of Arrakis. The heat was like a physical blow. His armor, designed for the cold of space, was now a black solar oven. His suit's internal cooling systems, already strained, whirred at maximum capacity, a constant, high-pitched whine in his ear. But the suit was also his salvation. It was a perfect, sealed environment. It shielded him from the searing heat, the abrasive, sand-filled wind, and the desiccating dryness that would have killed any other man in hours. He was a walking contradiction. He was a being perfectly and horribly adapted to this world. But he had a weakness, a fatal flaw. His respirator. The rhythmic, mechanical breathing that was the symbol of his power, the sound of his very existence, was now his greatest liability. The system required a constant, high-volume flow of air, which it filtered and cooled. But in the process, it also vented a significant amount of moisture into the atmosphere with every exhalation. He was a walking, breathing water thief, committing the greatest, most unforgivable sin of the desert with every breath he took. He was a creature of immense water consumption in a world where a single drop was more precious than a man's life. He knew this. He had learned it from the Harkonnen mines. He understood the brutal calculus of survival on Arrakis. And he knew that to the native Fremen his very existence would be seen as a blasphemy against the desert. He began to walk. His objective was to find a sietch, a community of the Fremen. He moved with his usual, relentless pace, his heavy boots sinking into the soft sand. The desert was a vast, empty canvas, but to his senses, amplified by the force, it was alive. He felt the strange, rhythmic thumping deep beneath the sand, the sign of the great worms, the makers of the spice. He felt the tiny, skittering life of the desert mice and insects, and he felt the minds of the Fremen, distant but present, watching him from the rocks, their thoughts a mixture of fear, suspicion, and a hard, flinty courage. He was being hunted. He allowed it. He needed to make contact, and a confrontation, he knew, was the most direct form of communication. He let them shadow him for a day. He felt their numbers grow. He felt their leaders debate what to do with this strange black golem that walked the desert as if it were a garden path. Finally, they chose to act. As he passed through a narrow, rocky canyon, they revealed themselves. Figures in gray-brown stillsuits, their faces hidden behind masks, their eyes a startling, brilliant blue in blue, the sign of total spice saturation. They rose from the rocks around him, a silent, deadly circle of warriors, their curved Kreis knives held ready. They were the desert, given human form, and they had come to reclaim his water. The Fremen circle was perfect. They moved with a silent, coordinated grace that spoke of a lifetime spent fighting and surviving in this harsh land. There were 20 of them, and at their head stood a tall, fierce-looking man with a jet-black beard and the brilliant, total blue eyes of the Ibad. This was Stilgar, the Naib of Sietch Tabran. He had seen the tracks of the Iron Ghost, as his scouts were calling it. He had seen the impossible weight, the unnatural stride. He did not know what it was, but he knew it did not belong in his desert. "You have come far, outsider." Stilgar's voice was a low, gravelly rasp. "You walk without a still suit. You waste your water with every breath. You are already dead. Give us your water, and we will grant you a clean death." Vader regarded the Fremen. He felt their strength, their discipline, their absolute unity with the desert. These were not primitives. They were a warrior culture, as fierce and as proud as any he had ever encountered. "I have no water to give," Vader's voice boomed, the sound strange and alien in the canyon. "And I have no intention of dying." "That is not your choice to make," Stilgar said, and he gave a sharp, subtle hand signal. The Fremen attacked. They did not charge as a mob. They moved like a pack of hunting wolves, 2 from the front, 2 from the sides, their movements designed to distract and overwhelm. Their Krisk knives, blades of milky crystalline white, flashed in the sun. Vader did not move. As the first 2 Fremen lunged, he simply raised a hand. The 2 warriors were stopped in midair, their bodies frozen by a force grip, their Kreis knives inches from his armor. He made a small, twisting gesture, and the 2 men were thrown back into the canyon wall with enough force to knock them unconscious. The other attackers faltered, their eyes wide with disbelief at this display of the weirding way. It was then that a new figure pushed his way to the front of the Fremen group. A young man, slim and dark-haired, his blue and blue eyes burning with an intensity that was more than just spice addiction. It was the fire of a prophet. It was Paul Atreides. He had been with the Fremen for weeks, learning their ways, his own prescient abilities growing daily under the influence of the spice-saturated environment. He had seen the Iron Ghost in his visions, the black hole in his future sight. Now he was face to face with it. "Stop!" Paul cried out, his voice ringing with a new, strange authority that made even Stilgar pause. "This is not a man you can kill with a blade." Paul stepped forward, his eyes locked on Vader's impassive black helmet. He saw not just an enemy, but a terrifying dark reflection of himself. He saw a being who had also looked into the abyss of the future, who had also seen the terrible paths of power, and who had made a different choice, a darker choice. "I have seen you in my dreams," Paul said, his voice a low, intense whisper. "You are a shadow on the path, a void. What are you?" Vader felt the boy's power. It was immense, raw, untrained, but vast, a psychic potential that rivaled his own in its youth. This was the Atreides heir, the one his mother, the witch, had been training. The Kwisatz Haderach, "I am the future you are so afraid of, boy," Vader replied, his voice a low, mechanical growl. "I am the path of true power, the path of order. You see an ocean of possibilities. I see the one single inevitable outcome." Their wills met in the space between them, a silent psychic clash. Paul saw 1,000 futures where he led his Fremen in a holy war, a jihad that would burn across the galaxy. Vader felt this, and he showed Paul a single, alternative future, a galaxy of perfect, silent, unchangeous order, a piece of the grave enforced by an iron fist. The clash was a stalemate. Paul was horrified by Vader's cold, dead vision. Vader was contemptuous of Paul's chaotic, bloody one. It was in that moment of psychic confrontation that the desert itself chose to intervene. A low, rhythmic, thumping sound began to vibrate through the canyon floor, a sound that every Fremen knew and revered. Thump, thump, thump. The sand on the canyon floor began to ripple. "A worm," one of the Fremen cried in a mixture of awe and terror. "A great one." The thumping grew louder, the vibrations more intense. The Maker was coming. The sound was a geological heartbeat, a rhythm that resonated deep in the bones. The Fremen, who revered the great sandworms as the physical embodiment of their desert god, instinctively began to scramble up the canyon walls, seeking the safety of the high rocks. Their confrontation with the Iron Ghost was forgotten, overshadowed by the arrival of a far greater and far more sacred power. "Outsider, to the rocks!" Stilgar yelled, his warning a mixture of command and genuine concern. "You cannot fight the Maker. It is death to stand against Shai-Hulud." But Vader did not move. He stood his ground on the canyon floor, his black form a pillar of defiance against the coming god. He turned his helmeted head, his sensors and the Force focused on the source of the vibration. He felt a colossal life form approaching, a being of immense size and primitive, powerful consciousness, a beast, and he did not flee from beasts. Paul, who had reached the safety of a high ledge with the other Fremen, looked down in disbelief. The man was insane. To stand on the open sand when a worm was coming was a form of suicide. The sand before Vader erupted, not with a trickle, but with a colossal, explosive spray. A vast, dark, circular mouth, 100 meters in diameter, rose from the desert floor. It was a cavernous vertical tunnel lined with 1,000 crystalline, dagger-like teeth. The air was instantly filled with the overwhelming, intoxicating scent of cinnamon and ozone, the breath of a sandworm. It was one of the great ones, an ancient of the deep desert, perhaps 400 meters long. Its immense segmented body rose higher and higher, a living mountain that blotted out the sun. It towered over the black-armored figure, its great dark maw poised to swallow him whole. The Fremen on the rocks watched in silent, religious awe. They were about to witness a sacrifice. The desert god had come to reclaim the water of the wasteful outsider. The great worm lunged, its mouth descending like a collapsing cathedral. Vader did not leap aside. He did not raise his lightsaber. He simply raised a hand. He reached out with the Force. He did not try to stop the worm's physical momentum. That would be like trying to stop a moon. Instead, he reached for its mind. The consciousness of the sandworm was a vast, ancient, and simple thing. It was not a mind of thoughts and plans, but of instinct, of territory, of the deep rhythmic life of the desert. It was a consciousness woven from sand, spice, and millennia of sun. Vader's will, a thing of iron and cold, focused rage, slammed into that primitive consciousness like a shard of obsidian. It was a violation, an intrusion of a kind the great worm had never known. He did not ask, he did not persuade, he commanded. The great sandworm, its mouth inches from engulfing the Dark Lord, stopped. Its colossal body, a thing of impossible momentum, froze in mid-lunge. The sand and rock cascading from its sides was the only sign of movement. It hung there, suspended, its crystalline teeth inches from Vader's helmet, its immense simple mind suddenly shackled by a will of pure, alien domination. On the rocks above, the Fremen were silent. Their gasps were frozen in their throats. This was impossible. This was a blasphemy. No one commanded Shai-Hulud. No one. Vader pushed his will deeper. He did not just stop the worm, he bent it. Slowly, with a deep groaning sound of protesting, ancient muscles, the great sandworm began to lower its head. It was not a retreat. It was an act of submission. The colossal godlike creature, the maker of the desert, bowed before the black-armored man. It lowered its head until its great blunt snout rested on the sand at Vader's feet. A new, profound, and terrifying silence fell over the canyon. The Fremen stared, their blue eyes wide with a mixture of religious ecstasy and absolute terror. They had been waiting for their Messiah, the Lisan al-Gaib, the voice from the outer world, a prophet who would lead them to paradise. They had thought it might be the young Atreides boy who had the weirding way and the dreams. But a prophet who can lead is one thing. A god who can command God is another. Vader stood before the bowed head of the sandworm, a dark master before his new titanic pet. He had not just survived the desert, he had just conquered its soul. And in the eyes of the Fremen, he had just transformed from a mysterious outsider into a figure of terrible, divine, and undeniable power. He was not a prophet, he was a god himself, a dark god for a dark people. The subjugation of Shai-Hulud was an act of such profound, blasphemous power that it irrevocably altered Vader's standing with the Fremen. He was no longer an outsider to be tested. He was a divine power to be feared and perhaps to be followed. Stilgar and his warriors led him back to Sietch Tabra, not as a captive, but as an honored and deeply terrifying guest. They gave him a place of honor in the Sietch, a cavern of his own. They offered him their water, a gesture of ultimate respect, which he refused, knowing his suit's internal recycling systems were far more efficient. He began to learn. He did not learn their ways, their culture, their religion. He saw those as primitive and irrelevant. He learned their secrets, the secrets of the spice. He had felt its power in the air, in the sand. Now, living in the heart of the desert, surrounded by it, he began to analyze it with the Force. He saw it for what it was, a psychoactive, life-extending chemical, yes, but it was more. It was a catalyst, a key. It was a substance that unlocked the latent psychic potential of the human mind, the very thing that the Jedi had sought to control and the Sith had sought to exploit. The Fremen ingested it, their bodies and minds becoming saturated with it over generations, granting them their blue eyes and their limited folk magic prescience. Vader had no need to ingest it. He was already a master of the psychic arts. He began to use the spice in a new, more direct way. In the solitude of his cavern, he would meditate, reaching out with the Force. He would find the pockets of raw, unrefined spice deep beneath the sand, the great masses of the melange at the heart of the worm's life cycle, and he would draw its energy directly into himself. It was not a physical act. It was a spiritual one. He used the Force as a siphon, pulling the raw, potent psychic energy of the spice into his own being. The effect was exponential. The Force, which had felt muted and distant on this world, now roared to life within him. The spice acted as an amplifier, a focusing lens for the dark side. His power, already immense, was magnified to a level he had not felt since he stood on the volcanic shores of Mustafar, his body whole, his rage at its absolute peak. His senses sharpened. He could feel every grain of sand in the desert, every Fremen mind in the Sietch, every thrumming beat of the great worms in the deeps. And a new power began to awaken within him, a dark, terrible, and utterly focused form of prescience. It was not like Paul Atreides' visions. Paul saw 1,000 possible futures, a swirling, confusing ocean of possibilities that he had to navigate. Vader's new vision was different. It was the vision of the Sith. He did not see possibilities. He saw inevitabilities. He saw the one single golden path that led not to freedom or enlightenment, but to his own ultimate goal, absolute, unshakable galactic order. He saw the path to the Emperor's throne. He saw the treachery of the Harkonnens. He saw the secret machinations of the Bene Gesserit, and he saw the young prophet Paul as the central chaotic variable that needed to be controlled or eliminated. He saw the future not as a map to be read, but as a blueprint to be built. His will, amplified by the spice and the dark side, was no longer just a force of domination. It was a force of creation, a creation of a new, dark destiny. The Fremen would watch him, this iron ghost, as he sat in silent, unmoving meditation for days at a time. They did not know what he was doing. They only knew that the air around him would grow cold, that the rock of his cavern would sometimes groan under an unseen pressure, and that when he emerged, the golden visor of his helmet seemed to hold a new, even more terrifying depth of knowledge and purpose. He was becoming more than just a dark lord. He was becoming a dark god, a being whose power was now intrinsically linked to the very soul of Arrakis. He was bonding with the spice, with the desert, with the worms, and he was turning it all into a weapon, a tool for his own singular galactic crusade. While Paul Atreides was slowly, carefully winning the hearts and minds of the Fremen through his prophetic dreams, his respect for their traditions, and his mastery of their ways, Vader chose a different path. It was the path of the Sith, the path of the Empire. It was the path of conquest. He had established a temporary base in Sietch Tabr, his presence tolerated and feared, but he had no interest in being a guest or a prophet. He had an interest in being a ruler. He needed a legion, a power base that was loyal only to him. He learned, through his probing of the Fremen minds, of the other Sietches, of their rivalries, of their traditions. He learned of the formal challenge, the Amthal, the trial by combat for leadership. It was a primitive but effective system. He chose his target, a large, notoriously fierce Sietch to the south, a community known for its suspicion of outsiders, and its brutal Naib, a warrior named Jamis. He did not go with an army. He went alone. He walked into their Sietch, a black armored specter, and his presence was an immediate, violent intrusion. He was met not with curiosity, but with drawn Kreiskknives. "I am Vader," his voice boomed through the cavernous Sietch. "This Sietch is now under my command. Your Naib is relieved of his duties. You will serve me." The arrogance of the declaration was absolute, and it was met with a roar of furious laughter from the Fremen. A warrior Jamis, a man known for his skill with the Kreiskknife, stepped forward. "You have no water, you have no tribe, you have no honor, outsider," Jamis snarled. "You will die here, and we will take your suit for its metal." He issued the formal challenge. Vader accepted. The duel was held in the center of the Sietchuk, the entire community forming a silent, watchful circle. Jamis was a blur of motion, his Kreiskknife a flashing arc of milky white, his movements fluid and deadly. Vader did not even ignite his lightsaber. He simply stood his ground, a pillar of black iron. Jamis's blade, which could cut through bone and rock, scraped uselessly against Vader's armor. The Fremen's speed was meaningless against an opponent who could anticipate his every move. After a few frustrating moments of Jamis's futile attacks, Vader ended it. He caught the Fremen's wrist in a crushing force grip. He lifted the struggling warrior into the air. "You have courage," Vader stated, his voice cold and analytical. "But your skill is irrelevant. Your strength is an illusion." He clenched his fist, and Jamis's body went limp, his neck broken. Vader dropped the body to the ground and turned to the stunned, silent Fremen. "I am your new Naib," he declared. "By right of combat, you will obey." But the Fremen of this Sietch were a proud, fierce people. They would not be so easily cowed. A dozen of Jamis's most loyal followers, with a roar of grief and rage, charged Vader. This was the moment of truth. Paul Atreides would have tried to reason with them, to win them over. Vader simply purged them. His lightsaber sprang to life, and the Sietch was filled with the sound of its hum and the screams of the dying. He cut them down with a brutal, terrifying efficiency. He was not just killing them, he was making an example of them. When it was over, he stood over the bodies of the 12 rebels, his crimson blade casting a bloody light over the horrified faces of the remaining Fremen. "This is the price of defiance," his voice boomed. "I offer you a choice. The same choice I will offer this entire world. Serve me in my new order, or die in your chaotic, pointless freedom. There is no third option." He then did something that sealed their fate. He reached out with the Force, amplified by the spice, and he projected his will, his vision of the golden throne, of the God Emperor, of the glorious, unstoppable might of the Imperium, into their minds. He did not offer it as a prophecy. He presented it as the one single inevitable future, a future in which they could be a part or be ground to dust beneath its treads. Their wills broke. Their proud, independent culture was shattered in a single night of terror and psychic domination. They knelt before him not as followers of a prophet, but as the first, terrified, and fanatically loyal soldiers of a new, dark god. Vader now had his legion. He had his fortress. He was no longer just an anomaly on Arrakis. He was a third power, a new house, a dark mirror to Paul's own rising influence. His Sietch was not a tribe. It was a barracks, and his Fremen were no longer the free people of the desert. They were the first of his stormtroopers. The final battle for Arrakis, when it came, was not the clean, decisive conflict that Paul Atreides had foreseen in his prescient visions. His sight was clouded, his golden path fractured by the great black void that was Darth Vader. He had seen a future where his Fremen holy war would sweep away the Harkonnens and the Emperor in a single glorious tide. He was not prepared for a war on two fronts. The battle began as Paul had planned. His Fremen, their zeal stoked to a fever pitch, their fighting skills honed to a razor's edge, erupted from the deep desert. Riding the great sandworms, they fell upon the Harkonnen and Imperial Sardaukar forces around Arrakeen with the fury of a natural disaster. The Harkonnen forces, decadent and overconfident, shattered under the assault. The Sardaukar, though fighting with their fanatical bravery, were overwhelmed by the sheer suicidal ferocity of the Fremen warriors. It was in the midst of this chaotic, swirling battle for the city that the third power made its move. From the deep south, a new army appeared. They marched not with the wild, ululating cries of Paul's Fremen, but in a dead, disciplined silence. It was Vader's legion. They were Fremen, but they were a horrifying parody of their kind. They wore not the free-flowing stillsuits of the desert, but black, crudely forged iron plates over their suits. They carried not just Kreis knives, but heavy, sharp-edged iron swords and pikes, and they marched in a perfect, terrifying phalanx, a block of black iron and silent, fanatical purpose. They did not ride the worms. They marched, their thudding, rhythmic steps a grim, mechanical heartbeat that was anathema to the wild spirit of the desert. At their head strode their dark master, his crimson blade already ignited, a bloody star in the dust-choked air. They did not attack the Harkonnens. They did not attack the Sardaukar. They attacked Paul's Fremen. The battle for Arrakis devolved into a chaotic, three-sided slaughterhouse. The Harkonnens and Sardaukar, caught between two different and warring Fremen armies, were thrown into utter confusion. They were fighting a holy war on one flank and a disciplined, silent meat grinder on the other. Paul's Fremen, their glorious jihad suddenly and brutally interrupted, were forced to turn and fight their own kind, a battle that was a deep, spiritual wound to their collective soul. They fought with passion and fury, but they were a chaotic force of individual champions. Vader's legion fought like a machine. Their shield wall was impenetrable. Their pike formations were perfect. They moved with a cold, ruthless efficiency, their every action dictated by the silent, telepathic commands of their lord. It was a war of three philosophies: the decadent, feudal power of the Harkonnens, the wild, fanatical, spiritual power of Paul's Fremen, and the cold, disciplined, industrial power of Vader's new empire. Paul, watching the battle from a high ridge, his heart filled with a new, cold dread, saw his perfect, glorious future being torn apart. His prescient sight was a storm of conflicting possibilities, the black void of Vader's presence, a vortex that was sucking all certainty from the world. He knew he had to face the source of this chaos. He had to confront the shadow that had haunted his dreams. He left the command of his army to Stilgar and made his way through the heart of the swirling, three-sided battle, a lone figure moving with a prophet's purpose. Vader, for his part, was not focused on the battle. The battle was a mere tool, a means to an end. His senses, amplified by the spice, were fixed on one target: the boy, the Kwisatz Haderach, the one other true power on this planet. He cut a bloody path through Harkonnen and Fremen alike, his lightsaber a whirlwind of death, his destination the same as Paul's. The two of them were being drawn together, two poles of a new, terrible axis upon which the fate of the universe would now turn. The battle for Arrakis was just the stage. The true war was about to begin. They met in the heart of the storm. The city of Arrakeen was a burning ruin behind them, the cries of three warring armies a distant, chaotic symphony. Paul Atreides and Darth Vader faced each other in a small, quiet plaza, the air between them thick with the dust of battle and the immense, unseen pressure of their own power. Paul was no longer the boy who had left Caladan. He was the Kwisatz Haderach, his body and mind saturated with the spice, his eyes a solid, brilliant blue. He was Muad'Dib, the prophet of the Fremen, and he could see the tangled web of all possible futures stretching out before him like a million golden threads. Vader was a pillar of absolute, unchangeable blackness. The spice had amplified his own dark prescience, but it was a power of a different kind. He saw only one future, one path, a straight, iron-hard line that led to his own vision of perfect, absolute order. "So the void has a face," Paul said, his voice a low, vibrating hum, the voice of a man who was now more than human. "You have seen the paths, boy," Vader's voice boomed. "You have seen the chaos, the endless, bloody slaughter you will unleash upon the galaxy in the name of your freedom. Your holy war will burn 1,000 worlds. It is an inefficient, wasteful, and ultimately pointless path." "And your path?" Paul countered, his blue eyes seeming to see through Vader's helmet, into the scarred and broken man within. A galaxy of slaves, kneeling in silent terror to a throne of iron, a piece of the grave. It is a peace that endures, Vader stated, the conviction in his voice absolute. The duel began. It was not a battle of blades, though Paul held his Christ knife and Vader his lightsaber. It was a battle of wills, of futures, of two entirely different kinds of gods. Paul struck first, not with his knife, but with his mind. He looked at Vader, and he saw every possibility, every feint, every attack Vader could possibly make. He moved before Vader moved, his Christ knife a blur, always in the one place Vader's lightsaber would not be. But Vader's power was not in seeing possibilities. It was in eliminating them. He did not try to outthink Paul. He simply attacked, a relentless, overwhelming storm of pure physical force and dark side power. He did not need to see the future. He was forging it, moment by moment, with his own unbending will. Paul could see the blow coming, but seeing it and stopping it were two different things. Vader's strength was immense, a physical reality that Paul's prescience could not simply wish away. He was forced to dodge, to weave, his perfect foreknowledge pitted against an imperfect but impossibly powerful body. Their psychic powers clashed. Paul tried to find the future where Vader failed, where he made a mistake, but he could not. Vader's presence in his future sight was a constant, unchangeable pillar of black. All paths that led to Vader's defeat were simply gone, erased. Vader, in turn, tried to crush Paul's mind, to break his will, as he had done with so many others. But he could not. Paul's mind was not in one place. It was in 1,000 futures at once. To crush it would be to crush a river, an ocean. It was a fluid, prescient power that his own rigid, focused will could not get a grip on. The battle was a perfect, absolute, and terrifying stalemate. Paul, the God Emperor of Dune, the being who could see all of time, could not defeat the one single man whose will was so strong it was a fixed point in it. Vader, the Dark Lord of the Sith, the being who could crush armies and command gods, could not defeat the one single man who could see his every move before he made it. They were two dark messiahs, two emperors, one who would enslave the galaxy through a fanatical, chaotic war of faith, the other who would enslave it through a cold, disciplined, and absolute piece of iron. Their duel ended not with a final blow, but with a dawning, horrifying realization. Neither of them could win. They stood, panting, their weapons lowered, as the battle for Arrakis raged around them, now a meaningless backdrop to their own cosmic struggle. They were twin gods, twin tyrants, born of different universes, but forged in the same crucible of power. They were locked in an eternal cold war, two opposing and equally terrible futures for a galaxy that was now terrified of them both. The universe had not found a savior. It had found two, and that was the greatest damnation of all.